The young Master Rudolph finally recovered after being paralyzed for 3 years, and his group of brothers specially held a celebration banquet at a private club. Susanna stood at the entrance of the club, holding a carefully prepared gift in her hands. Just as she was about to push the door open, she overheard Rudolph and his brothers talking inside. "Rudolph, Susanna has been absolutely devoted to you. If it weren't for her these past 3 years, how could you have recovered so well?" "Yeah. She's just a girl, yet she massaged you every day, accompanied you through rehabilitation, and didn't even dare to sleep soundly. Afraid you might have an emotional breakdown in the middle of the night. You should remember this kindness for a lifetime. She truly is a wonderful person." Rudolph's voice was deep and gentle. Susanna's fingertips trembled slightly as a wave of warmth rose in her heart. The next second, someone asked, "So when do you plan to marry her?" The private room suddenly fell into an eerie silence. Susanna's hand hung in mid-air, her heartbeat involuntarily quickening. She held her breath, as if awaiting a verdict. After a long pause, Rudolph's voice sounded faintly, "I see her as a sister, a sister." The brothers' voices suddenly rose sharply. "She's been by your side for 3 years, and you only see her as a sister." "Rudolph, don't tell me you're still hung up on Tess, back when you were in trouble. She didn't even offer a word of concern before running away. Now that you're better, she's back. Even if you like someone, it can't be her." Rudolph remained silent. Susanna stood outside the door, her heart feeling as if it were being tightly clenched. Silence itself was the best answer. She thought 3 years of constant companionship would earn her sincerity, only to realize his heart had always belonged solely to the one who abandoned him 3 years ago. Rudolph was still the proud son of heaven standing atop the clouds, graduated from a prestigious university, heir to a family business, proficient in skiing and equestrianism. Even his face seems like a meticulously crafted work of art by God. While Susanna was merely a scholarship student sponsored by the Sanford family, the first time she saw him was at the school's awards ceremony. He stood on the podium, his gaze cool and his posture upright, like an unattainable snowpine. And she sat in the last row, clutching the financial aid envelope, not even daring to clap too loudly. Back then, the one standing by his side was Tess, the school belle with a matching family background and striking beauty. Everyone said they were as perfect for each other as a prince and princess from a fairy tale, until that car accident. Rudolph suffered a spinal injury, and doctors declared he might never stand up again. Tess didn't even step into the hospital room. Just sent a breakup text before vanishing without a trace. Once the center of attention, the Sanford family's eldest son fell from grace overnight. He became irritable, gloomy, and even attempted suicide. Mr. Sanford, Mrs. Sanford were overwhelmed with grief but powerless to help. It was Susanna who stepped forward. She crouched before his wheelchair and whispered, "Rudolph, everything will be all right. I'll stay with you." For the next 3 years, she learned various massage techniques. Sleeping only 2 hours a day, fearing he might lose hope in the middle of the night, when he lost control of his emotions and smashed a stool against his own leg, she didn't hesitate to step in front of him, taking the blow herself. She stayed by his side year after year, becoming the most important person in his life. Everyone said Rudolph could only fall asleep when he saw Susanna. Now that he has recovered, everyone assumed he would marry her. Susanna had once fantasized about it too, but by now, how could she not understand what he meant? Now that he had recovered, Tess had returned, and it was time for her, the little sister, to exit the stage. She took a deep breath and pushed the door open. The laughter and chatter in the private room abruptly ceased as everyone turned to look, a group of brothers exchanging guilty glances. "Susanna, when did you arrive?" someone tentatively asked. "Just now," Susanna smiled, pretending not to have heard anything, and handed the gift to Rudolph. "Congratulations on your recovery." Rudolph was about to take it when the private room door swung open again. Tess stood at the door, her eyes slightly red. "Rudolph, I heard you've recovered. I came to congratulate you." The atmosphere in the private room instantly froze. "What are you doing here?" Rudolph's brothers looked displeased. "When Rudolph was in trouble, you ran faster than anyone. How dare you come back now?" Tess flushed with embarrassment, her eyes reddening. She shoved the gift into Rudolph's hands and turned to leave. Rudolph suddenly grabbed her wrist. "Since you're here, you might as well stay." Everyone froze, their eyes instinctively turning to Susanna. She stood there, her smile unchanged, only her nails digging deep into her palms. So 3 years of companionship ultimately couldn't withstand Tess's single tear. The atmosphere at the gathering that followed was eerily suffocating. Rudolph's brothers deliberately ignored Tess, relentlessly teasing Susanna and Rudolph. "Susanna, did you give Rudolph daily massages during his rehabilitation?" "Absolutely. Her technique is so professional that Rudolph only wants her. He gets upset if anyone else touches him. Susanna lowered her head, pretending not to see Tess's jealous glare. Although Rudolph remained silent on the surface, she could sense his attention was entirely focused on Tess. Midway, someone suggested playing a game, and Tess was the first to lose. The penalty was to ask someone of the opposite sex for their contact information. Instinctively, she looked toward Rudolph, her eyes pleading for help. Rudolph lowered his head to fiddle with his phone, pretending not to see. Tess bit her lip and stood up as if in defiance. Fine, I'll go then. Susanna watched her walk toward the neighboring booth, quickly surrounded by several men. One of them, drunkenly grabbing her wrist, slurred, "Hey beautiful," adding IG is fine, but can I get a feel too? Let me go. Tess's scream suddenly rang out. Rudolph jerked his head up and rushed over in the next second, punching the man in the face. You fucking looking for death. The scene instantly descended into chaos. Rudolph, stop fighting. The brothers quickly stepped forward to break it up. Susanna, fearing that his recently recovered health might be at risk, rushed forward to stop him. Rudolph, don't. Before she could finish, Rudolph pushed her away with a backhand. Move, bang. Susanna, caught off guard, slipped and tumbled down the stairs. The back of her head hit the ground hard. Her vision darkened momentarily, and warm blood trickled down her temple, staining her sight red. She struggled to prop herself up, only to see Rudolph walking away. Carrying Tess in his arms, he didn't even glance back at her. Her heart felt as if it had been torn open, the pain so intense it nearly suffocated her. Suddenly, she remembered the past. Back then, when his legs were disabled, he would self-destructively smash his own legs with a chair. She rushed to stop him, only to have 3 of her ribs broken by his uncontrolled force. With bloodshot eyes, he roared furiously, "My legs are already ruined. Smashing them won't matter. Are you trying to get yourself killed? Can't you tell what's more important?" She was in so much pain that cold sweat dripped from her, yet she stubbornly clung to his leg and whispered, "I can tell. Precisely because your legs are important, that's why I have to stop you. Because one day, I will definitely make you stand up again." At that moment, the ever-proud Rudolph trembled as he held her in his arms, his voice choked with emotion. "Susanna, don't leave me." Everyone said it was a miracle that Rudolph could stand up again, but only they knew what miracle was there. It was simply her desperately pulling him out of the abyss, bit by bit, and now, he had emerged from the abyss, but no longer needed her. At that very moment, Susanna's phone rang abruptly. With trembling hands, she pulled out her phone. The name Mrs. Sanford on the screen stung her eyes painfully. She knew all too well what this phone call meant. Sure enough, as soon as the call connected, Mrs. Sanford's tactful voice came through. "Susanna, you see, Rudolph is now the CEO of a publicly listed company. His wife can't be someone without status or background, someone who offers him no support. I'm very grateful for your unwavering care these past 3 years, but you must understand, if it weren't for the Sanford family's financial support back then, you wouldn't even have been able to attend university. Let's consider these debts settled, all right?" There was a pause on the other end of the line, as if waiting for her hysterical accusations or pitiful pleas. Susanna instead raised her eyes to look in the direction where Rudolph had left. The empty corridor seemed to mock her 3 years of unrequited devotion. "Fine," she heard her own voice, eerily calm. "I'll leave and never appear before him again." Susanna hung up the phone and went straight to the hospital. The wound on her forehead required 3 stitches, and the doctor instructed her to keep it dry. Numbly nodding, she left the examination room, only to spot Rudolph's Maybach not far from the hospital entrance. The car window was half open, revealing Tess sobbing uncontrollably against his shoulder. Her face streaked with tears. "Rudolph, I was wrong to hurt you back then." Her voice trembled with emotion. "I don't expect your forgiveness, but I had no choice. My parents opposed our relationship and forcibly sent me abroad. They even confiscated my phone. It wasn't that I didn't want to find you." Rudolph sat in silence, his profile sharp and unyielding. Susanna stood not far away, her feet seemingly rooted to the spot. "Then why have you come back now?" Rudolph finally spoke, his voice low. Tess lifted her face, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Because I couldn't forget you. I know you have Susanna now. I don't ask for anything else. Just don't send me away. Let me watch you from afar. That's all I ask." Susanna stood in the shadows, watching Rudolph in silence for a long time, before finally reaching out to wipe away Tess's tears. "I don't blame you," he said. "As for Susanna, I only see her as a sister, not what you thought." Tess's eyes lit up, her tears turning to laughter. "Really?" Rudolph nodded. Tess wept for joy and threw herself into his arms once more. Susanna smiled self-deprecatingly, turned away, and went straight to the immigration office. Immersive translate. At the immigration office, a staff member handed her a form. Your visa will be ready in 2 weeks. Susanna thanked them and walked out the door as dusk was falling. She returned to Rudolph's villa. For the past 3 years, she had lived here to conveniently take care of him. Once, she naively considered this place her home. The entrance still held the slippers she had carefully chosen. The living room displayed the succulents she had nurtured. And the kitchen bore the stomach-nourishing recipes she had written. Now, she was going to erase all these traces with her own hands. While packing her luggage, she found a photograph at the very bottom of the drawer. It was taken on the day Rudolph successfully completed his rehabilitation. He rarely smiled for the camera, but that day he did, and she stood beside him, her eyes crinkling into crescents of joy. The edges of the photo had yellowed slightly, worn from being touched too many times. Susanna stared at the photo for a long time before finally tossing it gently into the trash. Some dreams should have been awakened long ago. Early the next morning, Rudolph's phone call came through. I forgot to bring my stomach medicine. Can you deliver it to the office for me? His voice carried the hoarseness of morning, his tone so natural as if nothing had happened the night before. Susanna paused for 2 seconds. All right. As she arrived at the company, the elevator doors opened. And she happened to meet Tess carrying an exquisite food box as she stepped out. What a coincidence. Tess smiled brightly. I'm bringing lunch to Rudolph. Would you like to join? Susanna remained silent and followed her into the office. Rudolph was reviewing documents when he saw them enter together, raising an eyebrow slightly. What brings you both here at the same time? Met on the way. Tess smiled as she opened the food container, releasing an intense aroma of spicy mala fragrance. I made your favorite mala shangwa. Susanna suddenly changed her expression. He has a sensitive stomach and can't eat spicy food. Rudolph glanced at her and picked up his chopsticks. It's fine to have it occasionally. He picked up a piece of beef coated in red oil and ate it without changing his expression. Susanna clenched the stomach medicine in her bag, her knuckles turning white. Before long, Rudolph's forehead was covered in a thin layer of sweat. And his fingers holding the pen trembled slightly. Rudolph, are you feeling unwell? Tess asked with concern. I'm fine. Rudolph forced a smile. I still have work to do. You all go back first. Susanna gave him a deep look, silently placed the medicine on the table, and turned to leave. When she reached downstairs, Susanna still couldn't hold back. His stomach condition is very serious. You should be more careful when delivering meals in the future. Tess suddenly laughed. Susanna, haven't you figured out your place yet? To Rudolph, you're just a slightly special caregiver, so you need to remember these things. But I'm different. He loves me, so I don't need to pay attention to such details. She took a step closer, her red lips curling slightly. Even if I gave him poison, he would swallow it. Understand? Susanna's fingers trembled, her heart feeling as if it were being torn apart. She knew Tess wasn't wrong. It took her 3 years just to make Rudolph glance her way, yet Tess didn't have to lift a finger. He'd willingly swallow poison for her. That night, Rudolph returned with a face as pale as death. Susanna was pouring water in the kitchen when she heard the noise. Turning around, the glass nearly slipped from her hand. Didn't you take the medicine? Her voice tightened. It's too serious. I had to go to the hospital to get my stomach pumped. Rudolph collapsed weakly onto the sofa, his bangs soaked with cold sweat. Susanna jerked her hand, spilling scalding water that instantly reddened her skin. Does he really love Tess that much? Enough to eat her cooking even if it means getting his stomach pumped. She brought him a glass of warm water and knelt down to massage his stomach. Rudolph drank some water and, feeling her gentle comfort, finally relaxed his furrowed brow before drowsily falling asleep on her shoulder, just like countless times before. But this time, Susanna didn't linger to gaze at his features. She gently laid him down on the sofa, tucked him in with a blanket, and went upstairs without looking back. Immersive translate. When he woke up the next day, Rudolph was already standing in the living room dressed in a suit. Why is there so much less stuff in the house? He frowned as he looked around. Susanna opened her mouth to explain, but he had already changed the subject. Tess is holding an art exhibition today and invited us to go together. She just returned to the country and doesn't have many friends. Rudolph cut her off. Just think of it as showing her some support. Susanna clenched her fingers and finally nodded. At the art exhibition, Tess immediately approached Rudolph as soon as she saw him, affectionately linking her arm with his. Rudolph, the one I most wanted you to see is this. She pointed to an oil painting of snow-capped mountains, her voice soft. This was painted in Switzerland. When I thought of you every day. Rudolph listened quietly, his gaze fixed on the painting, deep and inscrutable. Finally, he bought all the paintings. Whispers immediately arose around them. I heard Mr. Rudolph used to dote on Mrs. Tess back then. It's really true, even after being abandoned once, he's still supporting her like this. It must be true love. Tess cast a triumphant glance at Susanna, and while Rudolph was paying at the counter, she walked up to her. Did you hear that? Even after I've been gone for so long, his heart still belongs only to me, lowering her voice. Her red lips almost brushing Susanna's ear, she added, if you still refuse to give up, I wouldn't mind making it even clearer for you to see. Just as the words left her mouth, the piercing sound of the fire alarm suddenly blared. Fire, run. The crowd instantly turned chaotic. Susanna was knocked down by the surge of people, her ankle twisting violently with pain so intense it darkened her vision. Struggling to stand, she saw Rudolph charging against the human tide. Tess, where are you? His voice carried a panic Susanna had never heard before. The next second, he found the panicked Tess, shielding her in his arms without hesitation as he rushed outside. Susanna collapsed to the ground. Watching helplessly as their figures vanished into the thick smoke, she desperately tried to stand up when suddenly, a deafening boom, a burning beam came crashing down. Immersive translate, when I woke up again, the blinding white light was the first thing I saw. Susanna, you're finally awake. My best friend Tyla rushed to the bedside, her swollen eyes filled with concern. You scared me to death. Do you know you almost died? Susanna struggled to move her neck, every bone in her body aching as if it had been disassembled and reassembled. Rudolph, she asked hoarsely. Tyla's expression instantly turned extremely grim. He's busy accompanying Tess. You only broke a rib, but Miss Tess scraped her skin. Of course she deserves his full attention. Susanna closed her eyes, her chest aching so badly it was hard to breathe. This Rudolph is truly too much. Back when he was paralyzed, who was it that cared for him day and night without rest? Who slept only 2 hours a day for fear he might do something reckless? And now, when you're so badly injured, Tyla tightly gripped her hand, voice choked with emotion. Susanna, he's fully recovered now, yet he still hasn't mentioned being with you. How much longer are you going to keep torturing yourself like this? The ward was so quiet that only the beeping of the monitor remained. After a long while, Susanna finally spoke softly. I've started applying for a visa. When the visa comes through, she murmured, her gaze fixed on the ceiling, her voice barely audible, I'll leave. As soon as the words left her mouth, the ward door was abruptly pushed open. Leave. Rudolph stood at the door, his face darkening. Who's leaving? Nothing. He is busy with work and has to leave early. Susanna lowered her eyelashes, avoiding Rudolph's probing gaze. Tyla gave her a hesitant look but ultimately didn't expose her, only glaring fiercely at Rudolph before saying, Susanna, call me anytime if you need anything. After the hospital room door closed, Rudolph walked to the bedside, his tone tinged with apology. There were too many people at the time. I didn't see you. It's all right. Susanna calmly interrupted him. Reaching for the water glass on the bedside table, she slightly raised herself, the collar of her hospital gown slipping open to reveal a horrifying burn scar below her collarbone. Rudolph, his pupils constricted sharply. How did you get so badly injured? I thought it was just minor smoke inhalation. Susanna, she glanced down indifferently and adjusted her collar. It's nothing serious. Rudolph, his brows furrowed tightly. I didn't know you were hurt like this. I thought you'd just fainted from the smoke. She twitched her lips. How would he know? His eyes were only on Tess. How could he notice how badly she was hurt? Susanna said nothing, just lowered her head and took a sip of water. I'll take care of you these days, Rudolph suddenly said. No need. Susanna shook her head. You're busy with work. Don't worry about me. Rudolph wanted to say something more when his phone suddenly rang. Rudolph, on the other end of the line. Tess's voice was choked with tears. My hand hurts so much. The doctor said the wound might be infected. Rudolph's expression instantly became hesitant. Susanna looked at him, the corners of her lips slightly curling up. Go ahead, Rudolph gripped his phone, his brows tightly furrowed. I'm not very good at taking care of people either. I'll find a nurse to look after you. Susanna nodded. Okay. Rudolph left in a hurry, and the ward finally returned to silence. Susanna stared at the ceiling and suddenly laughed. He said he would take care of her. But Tess, just one phone call, and he left without hesitation, just like in that fire. He rushed toward Tess without hesitation, not even glancing back at her. She slowly closed her eyes, her chest aching so much it nearly suffocated her. Some promises should never have been taken seriously from the very beginning. Immersive translate. On the day of her discharge, Rudolph personally came to pick her up. There's an auction tonight, you're coming with me. He handed her a newly purchased cashmere coat. Susanna subconsciously refused. No need. still angry. Rudolph thought she was still sulking and slightly frowned. I really didn't see you at the time. When I realized you hadn't come out, I immediately sent people in to search and rescue. Susanna opened her mouth but ultimately silently took the coat. After getting in the car, Susanna noticed Tess was also there. Tess wanted to come too, so we brought her along, Rudolph explained casually. Susanna remained silent, sitting quietly in the back seat. Throughout the journey, Tess chatted enthusiastically with Rudolph, ranging from their childhood anecdotes to experiences studying abroad. Rudolph, though not talkative, responded naturally to every remark. Susanna gazed at the fleeting scenery outside the window, silent like an outsider. At the auction venue, every item that Tess glanced at for even a moment, Rudolph would raise his paddle to buy and gift to her. Such extravagant gestures quickly drew the attention of those around them. Isn't that Mr. Rudolph? He's so generous with his companion. They say his girlfriend took care of him for 3 years. No wonder he's spoiling her. Wait, that doesn't seem to be Ms. Susanna from the news, but rather the one who dumped Mr. Rudolph before. Amidst the whispers, someone mistakenly identified Tess as Susanna. Rudolph paused for a moment upon hearing this, then turned to Susanna as if suddenly remembering something. What do you want? Coincidentally, a sapphire necklace was presented on stage, shimmering with an abyssal glow under the lights. Susanna unconsciously let her gaze linger for an extra second. Rudolph immediately raised his paddle. 10 million. This necklace has quite a history. Tess suddenly spoke up. It was a love token from a foreign king to his queen, symbolizing loyalty and undying love. She gave Susanna a meaningful glance. It would be quite fitting to gift it to Ms. Susanna. Rudolph's fingers paused momentarily. After the necklace was delivered, he directly handed it to Tess, saying, "This suits you better." "This isn't appropriate, is it?" Tess pretended to hesitate. "Didn't Ms. Susanna pick this out? I'll buy her something else." Rudolph looked at Susanna and asked, "What would you like?" Susanna lowered her eyes, a self-deprecating smile curling at the corners of her lips. A gift symbolizing fidelity cannot be given to her, but it can be given to Tess. The difference between love and the lack of it is so strikingly clear. "No need," she said softly. After the auction concluded, the guests dispersed in small groups. Taking advantage of Rudolph being surrounded by greetings, Tess seized the moment to walk over to Susanna. "Susanna, now you should see clearly, right?" Tess lowered her voice, her red lips curling into a smug smile. "Rudolph likes me. If you keep clinging to him like this, you'll only make him dislike you more." Susanna looked at her quietly, her eyes calm. "You'll get your wish." "What do you mean?" Tess frowned. Susanna did not answer, turning to leave. A sudden scream came from behind. Susanna turned around to see Tess tumbling down the stairs. "Susanna!" Rudolph's roar exploded through the venue. He rushed over and shoved Susanna aside with such force that she staggered and crashed into the wall. "What did Tess ever do to you? How could you treat her like this?" he demanded sharply, his gaze chillingly cold. "Even if I failed to protect you those times, take it out on me. Why hurt her?" Susanna pressed her back against the cold wall, her voice soft but firm. "I didn't push her, Rudolph." Tess weakly grasped Rudolph's sleeve. "It was my own carelessness. It has nothing to do with Ms. Susanna. You don't need to speak for her." Rudolph cast a cold glance at Susanna before bending down to scoop Tess into his arms. "I won't bother with you. Go back on your own." Susanna stood still, watching Rudolph carry Tess away in a hurry. His suit jacket was still draped over Tess, his careful demeanor as if he were holding some precious treasure. "He's always like this. As long as Tess cries, she must be the one in the wrong." She touched the plane ticket in her pocket. A flight to London in a week that would take away all her love and pain. He wouldn't have to think of her as a burden anymore, because soon, this burden of hers would disappear from his world forever. The auction venue was far from the villa and located in a remote area. Susanna couldn't hail a taxi at all and had to walk back on foot. The rain started when she was halfway there. The icy rain soaked her hair and clothes, her shoes filled with water, and every step felt like walking on knife blades. By the time she finally got home, blisters had formed on the soles of her feet, and her whole body was burning with fever. She forced herself to find some medicine, briefly treated her wounds, and then fell into a heavy, dazed sleep. The next day, she was awakened by noises coming from downstairs. As soon as she went downstairs, she found the living room filled with Tess's luggage. Rudolph's voice came from the living room. "Tess's parents are abroad, and it's not safe for her to live alone. She'll stay here for the next few days. Be mindful and don't play any of your little tricks again." Susanna held onto the stair railing, her face pale as she walked downstairs. "I won't." She wouldn't play any little tricks again, nor would she like him anymore. Tess, during the time she lived here, Susanna saw a completely unfamiliar side of Rudolph. He would remember Tess doesn't eat cilantro, and would proactively replace dishes she disliked when she frowned, on stormy nights. He would be the first to comfort the startled Tess. The study that once never allowed Susanna to enter, now Tess could come and go as she pleased. Susanna finally understood that this was how Rudolph loved someone. She recalled the past few years, when she had secretly rejoiced over his restraint from self-harm during his manic episodes because of her presence, foolishly believing it was proof he had begun to like her. How ridiculous, that day. Susanna passed by the study and caught a glimpse of Tess playing with something in her hands. She stopped and peered through the half-open door. Tess was holding in her hand none other than Rudolph's grandmother's heirloom mutton fat jade pendant. The jade pendant teetered precariously at her fingertips, nearly slipping free several times. Susanna watched with bated breath before rushing in to snatch the pendant away. "What are you doing?" "This is Rudolph's grandmother's keepsake. How could you just, what's it to you?" Tess snapped impatiently, then seeing her tension, suddenly curled her lips into a malicious smirk. "You care that much? Well then," she deliberately let go. Crash. The jade pendant hit the ground hard, shattering into two pieces. Susanna's heart nearly stopped. That was Rudolph's most treasured possession, a family heirloom his grandmother personally handed to him on her deathbed. "What's going on?" Rudolph's voice came from the doorway. Susanna looked up to see him glaring darkly at the shattered pieces on the floor. "It was Miss Susanna who broke it." Tess spoke up first, her voice tinged with grievance. "I was just holding it to look when she rushed over to snatch it." Rudolph's eyes instantly turned cold. "Susanna, how dare you? There's surveillance in the study." Susanna interrupted him softly, her voice trembling slightly. "You can check for yourself to see what really happened." The air instantly froze. Tess changed her expression and reluctantly corrected herself. "I'm sorry, Rudolph, I accidentally broke it. Is it important to you? I'll get you an identical replacement." Surprisingly, Rudolph's anger dissipated instantly. He quickly walked over to Tess and held her hand. "Are you hurt?" Susanna stood still, watching Rudolph carefully examine Tess's fingers, feeling as if a piece of her heart had been brutally carved out. No one understood the significance of this jade pendant to Rudolph better than she did. 3 years ago, when Mrs. Sanford accidentally lost this jade pendant, Rudolph had just undergone leg surgery, dragging his sick body. He searched for 3 hours in the snowy night. Upon returning, he had a fierce argument with his mother and locked himself in his room, smashing things. It was Susanna who braved the heavy snow, searching inch by inch in the yard, her fingers numb from the cold. She finally found the jade pendant at dawn, but now, the jade pendant was Tess who deliberately shattered it, and all he cared about was whether she was hurt. Susanna laughed at herself mockingly. So he loved Tess to such an extent. Yet she was so naive as to believe Rudolph would marry her after his recovery. Countless days and nights, she stayed by his sickbed, watching him endure the agony of rehabilitation, silently vowing in her heart to accompany him for a lifetime. Even during his most despondent moments, she still wrote in her diary the laughable wish, "I'll marry him when he stands up again." Now it seems she was nothing but a complete joke from start to finish. Fortunately, she finally came to her senses. She would never again invest her genuine feelings where they weren't valued. After that day, Susanna hardly ever left her room. Until dinner that evening, Tess suddenly clutched her stomach in pain, collapsing pale-faced into Rudolph's arms. "What's going on?" Rudolph panicked and immediately called for his private doctor. After the examination, the doctor looked grave. "It's poisoning." The entire villa immediately fell into chaos. The servants stood trembling to the side while the butler had already begun interrogating the dinner preparation process. I saw," a young maid timidly spoke up, "saw Ms. Susanna add something to the soup." Rudolph's eyes instantly turned icy. He strode over to Susanna, grabbing her wrist with such force it nearly crushed her bones. "Just because of that jade pendant, you'd try to kill Tess. Susanna, how could you become like this?" Susanna looked up at him, her voice barely audible. "I didn't." "Still dare to argue," Rudolph said with cold eyes, turning to the servant. "Bring the remaining soup." Susanna's pupils contracted. "What are you going to do?" "To teach you a lesson." Rudolph gripped her chin, his voice icy. "So you'll know what to do and what not to do in the future." The servant brought the remaining soup and, under Rudolph's direction, forcibly poured it into Susanna's mouth. Susanna struggled desperately but was firmly restrained by 2 bodyguards. The warm broth was forcibly poured down her throat, making her cough violently. The drug took effect with alarming speed. Susanna collapsed to her knees in agony, her back instantly drenched in cold sweat, curled into a tight ball. Her nails dug deep into her palms as she stubbornly repeated, I didn't poison anyone. Rudolph didn't even glance at her, staying by Tess's bedside the entire time, carefully feeding her water and gently wiping the sweat from her forehead with a damp towel, his gaze so tender it could melt. Rudolph, Tess weakly grasped his hand. Susanna, don't speak for her, Rudolph whispered soothingly, just rest well. Susanna's consciousness began to blur, the intense pain darkening her vision, and the last thing she remembered was being roughly lifted into an ambulance. She lay in the hospital all night, and not a single person came to see her. When she returned to the villa the next day, the entire house was empty. Her phone vibrated. It was a photo sent by Tess. Under the blue sky and sea, Rudolph had his arm around Tess's waist, both smiling brightly at the camera. Photo caption: someone brought me to the seaside to unwind. Saying I needed to relax after the shock, Susanna quietly locked her screen and began packing her luggage. As she zipped up the suitcase, she suddenly realized how few belongings she had in this place she'd lived for 3 years. A single 24-inch suitcase was enough to hold all traces of her existence. She never truly belonged here, just as she never truly entered his heart. Do you realize your mistake now? Rudolph's voice suddenly came from behind. Susanna turned around and saw him standing at the door in a well-tailored suit, his brows slightly furrowed as he scrutinized her with his gaze. I was wrong, she said softly, wrong to have liked you, wrong to have stubbornly stayed by your side all these years. Rudolph's expression softened slightly. Good that you know you were wrong. Change your clothes. We're going to the party. Party. Susanna froze slightly. You don't remember today is my birthday. Rudolph frowned even deeper, his tone carrying a hint of disbelief, as if her forgetting this matter was utterly unreasonable. Susanna then vaguely recalled, yes, today was his birthday. In previous years, by this time she would have already prepared the cake, carefully selected a gift, and even personally arranged everything. She would remember his favorite flavors, the decorations he disliked, and every single birthday wish he made each year. But now, she had actually forgotten. You go ahead, she said softly, her voice so faint it was almost inaudible. I'll change my clothes, get the gift ready, and then join you. Rudolph, Tess's voice came from downstairs, carrying a coquettish tone. Everyone's waiting for you. Rudolph nodded, finally looking at Susanna one last time. Hurry up and come over. With that, he turned and left, the sound of his footsteps gradually fading away. Susanna stood where she was, watching his figure disappear at the end of the hallway, a faint, self-deprecating smile curling at the corner of her lips. Rudolph, this time, my birthday gift to you is to disappear from your world from now on, letting you and Tess be together, and also freeing myself. She picked up the already packed suitcase, took one last look around the place she had lived for 3 years, and left without looking back. The airport was bustling with people. Susanna stood in front of the boarding gate, took out her phone, and sent Rudolph one last message. Rudolph, I'm leaving. May you and Tess remain deeply in love, united in heart until old age. Then, she turned off her phone and walked toward the boarding gate. 3 years of infatuation, awakened from the dream in a single morning. From now on, mountains high and rivers long, never to meet again. On the other side, in the most luxurious hotel, the Sanford family, as one of the top elite families in City K, naturally drew much attention for the birthday banquet of the Sanford family group heir, Rudolph. The guests in attendance were all notable figures from the upper echelons of society. But the man at the center of attention seemed somewhat distracted at the moment. Also noticing the anomaly were Rudolph's brothers. Hey, that's strange. Susanna hasn't come over yet. Could she have forgotten? How could that be? In all these years, when have you ever seen Susanna forget anything about Rudolph? True, but the banquet is already halfway through, and this is the first time Susanna has been this late. The group exchanged glances, and eventually, all eyes turned to Rudolph. Seeing him lost in thought, Sawyer finally couldn't hold back and tentatively spoke up. Rudolph, maybe you should call Susanna again and ask. No need, she's just preparing a gift. Hearing their words, Rudolph instinctively shook his head in refusal. Hearing this, although the group still felt somewhat puzzled, they ultimately didn't say anything more. Perhaps they were really just overthinking it. Just then, the birthday celebration reached the gift-giving segment. Sawyer and his brothers each presented their gifts in turn, and soon it was Tess's turn. Although Sawyer and the others disliked Tess for abandoning Rudolph back then, today was after all Rudolph's birthday banquet, so in the end they said nothing until she, blushing with embarrassment, presented the congratulatory gift she had prepared with her own hands. Rudolph, this is my... But before she could finish her words, Rudolph in front of her suddenly changed his expression after glancing at his phone, in full view of everyone. He pushed aside the person before him and ran outside. Caught completely off guard, Tess was pushed to the ground. The sharp pain brought sudden tears to her eyes. Instinctively, she wanted to call out to Rudolph. But the man who had always put her first, Rudolph, this time didn't even glance her way before rushing out of the banquet hall. For a moment, everyone exchanged bewildered looks, unsure of what had just happened. Sawyer and the others were also caught unprepared by this sudden turn of events. Someone suddenly remembered Susanna, who still hadn't appeared. Their face paled. Could something have happened to Susanna? As soon as the words were spoken, they all grew anxious and hurriedly chased after him, leaving only Tess lying on the ground. When she heard their last words, she gritted her teeth in fury. Susanna, it's Susanna again, but no one cared about what she was thinking. Rudolph rushed back to the villa at full speed, only to find it completely empty, yet he still refused to give up, going straight upstairs to search every possible place, but there was nothing. Not only Susanna had disappeared, but also everything related to her was gone. He stood blankly in the empty room, staring at the message sent not long ago on his phone and the string of numbers beneath the contact name. After a long pause, as if suddenly remembering something, he pressed the numbers and made the call. Even he himself hadn't noticed that his hands were already trembling uncontrollably while dialing. The busy tone kept ringing in his ears, tangling his heart into a mess. But Susanna didn't answer, as the call ended automatically. The doorbell rang at just the right moment. He didn't know how he managed to go downstairs and open the door. Seeing the anxious faces of Sawyer and the others outside, he still felt an overwhelming sense of unreality. Rudolph, why did you come back so suddenly? Did something happen to Susanna? Suppressing the strange, aching sensation in his chest, he opened his mouth but remained silent for a long time before finally replying in a hoarse voice. Susanna said, she's gone. Gone. Gone where? Sawyer froze upon hearing this, his anxious expression instantly solidifying, while the astonishment on the others' faces was equally evident. None of them had ever considered Susanna leaving as a possibility. Over the years, they watched Rudolph experience dramatic ups and downs because of that accident, and they also saw the people around him come and go. Even they, who witnessed Rudolph's unpredictable temperament back then, lacked the courage to stay by his side all along. From beginning to end, there was only one Susanna who came to his side at his most wretched and destitute moment, offering him the utmost patience and tolerance. No matter how he lashed out, she never once thought of leaving. Why suddenly, at that moment? His phone suddenly rang again, and almost instinctively, Rudolph answered it first. Susanna, where are you? But before he could finish, Tess's voice came from the other end of the line. Rudolph, I sprained my ankle. Can you take me to the hospital? In the past, Rudolph would have rushed over immediately, but perhaps Susanna's sudden departure had left him momentarily flustered, and he reflexively refused. I'm busy right now, find someone else. As soon as these words were spoken, even Sawyer and the others looked at him in surprise. However, seeing him distance himself from Tess, they were naturally pleased to witness it. Tess hadn't expected him to refuse so bluntly, clenching her teeth. Her face stiff and gloomy, she still forced herself to appear understanding, her voice thick with disappointment. All right, is there something wrong with Miss Susanna? That must be why you're in such a hurry just now. Rudolph suddenly remembered that he seemed to have knocked something over in his haste. After a moment's hesitation, he finally spoke up. Wait, I'll be right there. The call ended, and he turned back toward the banquet hall, leaving the others exchanging puzzled glances. Immersive translate, hospital, just a minor bump, apply some ointment and rest for a few days, and it'll be fine. After the doctor reviewed Tess's examination report, they handed the results back to Rudolph. Only then did he feel relieved, knowing she was all right. Just as I was about to take Tess home, a familiar figure suddenly appeared in my line of sight. Susanna, his expression changed, and without regard for Tess still being by his side, he quickly rushed out and grabbed that person. Perhaps because of the message he had received not long ago, as he held the person in front of him, Rudolph used all his strength, as if afraid she would escape again. But when he turned around with the person in tow and saw the unfamiliar face, he realized he had mistaken her for someone else. Suddenly grabbed by a stranger, the pain spread through his wrist. And the man hissed lightly, his expression far from pleasant. Who the hell are you? Sorry, wrong person. He awkwardly let go, apologizing absent-mindedly, watching the person walk away, unable to snap out of it for a long time. It wasn't her. Did she really leave? Rudolph, what's wrong? Tess barely managed to suppress the gloom in her heart, forcing a smile as she limped over to Rudolph's side, seeing him still staring blankly in the direction where that person had left. She couldn't help but speak first. He shook his head, supporting her as they walked toward the ward. After seeing her safely inside, he turned around and left the room again, making a call to his assistant. Find out where Susanna went. Immersive translate. That night, Rudolph returned to the Sanford family old residence at Mrs. Sanford's request. Just as he was pondering how to explain Susanna's departure, Mrs. Sanford showed no surprise at his solitary return and instead cheerfully pulled him inside. You came just in time. Aunt Wu just finished cooking. Today is your birthday, and she specially made your favorite dishes. Come and try them. Rudolph was pulled to sit at the dining table. When he looked up, he noticed an unfamiliar woman sitting across from him. Stirring a strange feeling in his heart, he turned to Mrs. Sanford and asked calmly, "And this is Elsa." Mrs. Sanford replied. Then turned to Elsa with a beaming smile, even picking up some food for her. "This is my son, Rudolph. You can just call him Rudolph." "Thank you, Auntie." Elsa smiled and nodded at Mrs. Sanford before turning her gaze to Rudolph, extending her hand toward him. "Rudolph, you can just call me Elsie." Elsa naturally understood the purpose of this meal. The two families were well matched in social status, and coincidentally, they were also discussing a collaboration recently. This dinner, aside from bringing the two families closer, also carried the intention of arranging a marriage alliance. Elsa knew Rudolph had two women by his side, but she didn't mind. After all, those two people, one had abandoned him when he was down and out. Perhaps for a while, he might still hold on to some lingering resentment over being discarded, but who could truly remain completely free of bitterness towards someone who had abandoned them? The other was just a country girl with no status or background. If not for the support of the Sanford family, she would never have crossed paths with Rudolph. Even if she later gained some favor by caring for Rudolph after his car accident, she still posed no real threat. After all, in Rudolph's heart, she couldn't even compare to Tess. Rudolph quickly understood Mrs. Sanford's intention. His expression darkened as he stared at her outstretched hand, hesitating to respond. The atmosphere grew increasingly tense. Mrs. Sanford tried to ease the situation with a smile, pulling Elsa back to her seat. "Rudolph has always been like this since he was a child. Don't take it to heart. He'll warm up once you get to know him better." Elsa's expression stiffened slightly, but in the end, she said nothing. A prodigy like him is bound to have his own temper, especially after going through such a life-altering event. Mrs. Sanford had originally intended for them to get acquainted first and then gradually interact. But she never expected Rudolph to be so uncooperative. Elsa initiated conversations, but he wouldn't engage. Mrs. Sanford tried to mediate, yet he evaded the topic and maintained an attitude of sheer indifference throughout, from beginning to end. Rudolph acted as if Elsa wasn't even present. While she might have tolerated it at first, seeing his behavior, even the most patient temperament would eventually reach its limit. She abruptly stood up and walked out. "Auntie, I see that Mr. Rudolph has no intention of continuing the conversation. Perhaps it's best to just let this matter drop." The meal ended on an unpleasant note. Mrs. Sanford helplessly escorted Elsa out of the Sanford family's old residence, then shot Rudolph an exasperated glance. "What were you thinking? I asked you to come home for a meal, and this is how it turns out." Even after Elsa had walked away, Rudolph didn't bother to look up even once, continuing to eat his food in silence. Only after hearing Mrs. Sanford's words did he respond indifferently. "When you called me back, you didn't mention this would happen. The two families have been collaborating recently. I just thought it wouldn't hurt to make a friend." Mrs. Sanford said with a mix of reproach and frustration, but seeing his utterly indifferent demeanor, she could only sigh again. "Fine, if you don't like this one, I'll look for someone else." No sooner had the words been spoken than Rudolph put down his chopsticks. "Don't waste your breath. I'm not going." "Rudolph, I'm not deliberately rushing you, but you have to get married eventually." Hearing this, Mrs. Sanford also sighed. "I know you still can't let go of that woman Tess, but Rudolph, don't forget. When you were in trouble, the first person to cut ties with you was her." When Mrs. Sanford mentioned Tess, he should have defended her, but for some reason, his words came out differently. "What about Susanna? Didn't you always want her to be your daughter-in-law before?" Hearing Susanna's name again, Mrs. Sanford paused for a moment. Her reply almost blurted out, "Susanna, didn't she already go abroad?" Going abroad, Rudolph suddenly changed his expression, standing up abruptly to look at Mrs. Sanford. "What do you mean by that?" Perhaps not expecting such an intense reaction from him, Mrs. Sanford immediately seemed evasive, her words becoming hesitant. What do you mean?" "You must have misheard." With that, she turned to leave in a fluster, but Rudolph was quicker, blocking Mrs. Sanford's path in the blink of an eye. he blocked her path completely, remaining silent yet resolutely refusing to yield. Mrs. Sanford even felt that unless she provided a clear explanation, he could persist in this standoff indefinitely. Suddenly, a wave of displeasure rose within her, just over a Susanna. Was it really necessary to pressure her own mother like this? That's right. She went abroad. What of it? Rudolph took one look at Mrs. Sanford's expression and, recalling her unusual attitude earlier that day, immediately understood what was going on. Where have you taken her? His face darkened, his voice laced with barely suppressed fury. Hearing this, Mrs. Sanford's expression soured as well. She walked over to the dining table and sat down with an air of nonchalance, casting him a sidelong glance. Only after noticing his stormy countenance did she smile again. Rudolph, there's no need to be so harsh. What do you mean by where have I taken her? She's a living, breathing person. What could I possibly do to her? She's just a poor girl with no background or connections. If it weren't for the Sanford family's sponsorship of her education back then, who knows where she'd be now? Not only has she finished school, but she's also been given the opportunity to study abroad. She should be grateful. Fortunately, she was sensible enough and agreed quite readily. Rudolph had never imagined that the truth of the matter would turn out to be like this. He had guessed that perhaps it was Mrs. Sanford who made her leave, but he never expected that Susanna had left voluntarily. Impossible. His face instantly turned pale, and his voice carried a slight tremor. After all, he was her own son. Seeing him so devastated, Mrs. Sanford's voice softened again as she tried to comfort him gently. Rudolph, if they could leave you so easily, it just means they weren't meant for you. You're the sole heir of the Sanford family conglomerate. There are plenty of women who'd want to marry you. Why keep fixating on those two? Immersive translate. After leaving the Sanford residence, Rudolph went straight to the largest club in City K, in the private VIP room. Rudolph drowned his sorrows in glass after glass of alcohol. The table before him was already littered with empty bottles, and from drinking too much, his consciousness had begun to blur. Sawyer watched Rudolph like this, hesitating as if wanting to say something. After a long pause, he finally spoke up to advise, Rudolph, drink less. The doctor said you shouldn't binge. The others also chimed in, but from beginning to end, no one dared to mention Susanna. Rudolph, holding the wine glass, showed no reaction, only continuously downing one glass after another. Turning a deaf ear to their words, Sawyer had no choice but to take the phone and dial a number. Tess was somewhat surprised when she received the call, as ever since the day she returned to the country, she could sense the dissatisfaction from Sawyer and his group towards her. She certainly knew where their dissatisfaction came from, but she never cared about those things. As long as Rudolph didn't mind these trivial matters, what did other people and things have to do with her? After waiting for a while and seeing that the call hadn't been hung up on the other end, she finally picked it up. What's wrong? Is there something? Rudolph is drunk. Come over and talk to him. Upon hearing it was about Rudolph, Tess didn't delay and hurried over. By the time she arrived at the private room, he was already completely drunk and unconscious. Seeing the table filled with empty liquor bottles, even she was startled and instinctively asked, what happened? Why did he drink so much? The others shrugged, none daring to speak. What could they say? How could they tell the person who might now be the only one able to persuade Rudolph that his current state was because of another woman? Fortunately, Tess didn't overthink it. Seeing him in such a drunken state, her concern outweighed everything else. She stepped forward and gently woke the unconscious Rudolph. Rudolph, how are you feeling? A woman's voice reached his ears. He groggily opened his eyes but couldn't make out the speaker's face clearly, only feeling an inexplicable sense of familiarity. So when she approached, Rudolph didn't resist, letting her help him up. He's had way too much to drink. I'll take him home first. Tess instinctively took on the responsibility of bringing him back. Sawyer and the others quickly nodded in agreement, all too eager to pass off this hot potato. Watching the two figures leave the private room, one named Mark spoke up. What do you think Rudolph really means by this? Sawyer shook his head and let out a long sigh. Who knows? If Rudolph loves Tess, he couldn't make a choice before due to the debt of gratitude from his paralysis days. But now that Susanna has left, he should be happy, if the one he loves is Susanna. Then why did he say he only saw her as a sister before, and always favored Tess in every way? No one understood Rudolph's thoughts, not even Rudolph himself. Rudolph woke up the next day. The glaring sunlight streamed through the open window, casting its rays upon him. A pounding headache from the hangover overwhelmed him as he frowned and rubbed his temples. Instinctively, he glanced toward the bedside, where a bowl of hangover soup was predictably placed, as if struck by a sudden thought. Excitement surged through his mind. he threw off the covers and dashed out of the room, heading straight for the kitchen. The sound of porcelain clinking was incessant. As he pushed open the door, a name escaped his lips, Susanna. The person's movements froze instantly but quickly returned to normal. She turned around, pretending not to have heard anything. Rudolph, you're awake. There's hangover soup by the bedside. Did you drink it? Never mind. That bowl must be cold by now. Let me get you a fresh one. With that, she turned around to fetch another bowl of hangover soup and handed it over with a smile. Rudolph glanced at it, remained silent for a moment, and then finally accepted it. How is it? Seeing him take it, Tess asked with a hint of anticipation in her eyes. A large bowl of hangover soup went down his throat, and indeed, the headache eased slightly, though he couldn't shake the feeling that the taste was somewhat off. Unlike the hangover soup Susanna used to make for him when he drank too much in the past, at the thought of the name Susanna, he fell silent for a moment before finally nodding. It's good. As the words fell, the two fell into silence once more. Just as Tess was about to say something, he suddenly spoke up. Your parents should have returned to the country, right? His question came abruptly. Tess hadn't even processed his meaning yet, but she nodded first. They returned 3 days ago. Until the next second, she heard him say, earlier, I let you stay because you said no one was at home. Now that your parents are back, you should move back today. I'll have someone take you back later. With that, he turned and left, not bothering to look at her reaction. Rudolph, unfortunately, Tess had no intention of letting him leave so easily. Seeing that he wouldn't even turn around, she stepped forward and grabbed his hand. Rudolph, what do you mean by this? Are you trying to drive me away? Her expression flustered. She instinctively tightened her grip, feeling the pressure on his wrist. Rudolph frowned almost imperceptibly. He pulled his wrist free, his voice tinged with impatience. You shouldn't have come here in the first place. The words were spoken with such finality and coldness that both of them froze in stunned silence the moment they fell. In the blink of an eye, Rudolph saw Tess's eyes well up with tears. I'm sorry. There's no need to see me out. I'll leave right away. Wiping her tears, she turned and ran. Rudolph instinctively reached out to stop her, but halted mid-motion as his hand extended. What is he doing? Watching Tess's figure gradually fade into the distance, he pursed his lips and ultimately said nothing. Forget it. Let it be. He also felt he needed to think carefully about what he truly wanted. Immersive translate. Time flew by, and 3 years had passed in the blink of an eye. City K Airport. The plane left a white trail of exhaust in the sky as it circled to land. In the crowded and noisy terminal, Susanna stood out in her light blouse and skirt, looking distinctly out of place among the heavily bundled-up crowd. Dragging her heavy suitcase along with the flow of people, she muttered under her breath, who knew City K could be this cold in summer? I need to find a place to change clothes as soon as possible. The man beside her couldn't help but chuckle at her words. As he spoke, he took off his coat and draped it over her shoulders. I told you it's unusually cold this year, but you wouldn't listen. Now you've learned your lesson, haven't you? The coat, still warm from his body heat, enveloped her completely. She opened her mouth to say something but ultimately remained silent. One who eats another's food is bound by gratitude. And one who takes another's gifts is softened in resolve. For now, she decided to tolerate him a little longer. Alvis casually took the suitcase from her hand and strode outside. After just a few steps, Susanna suddenly stopped. I need to use the restroom. Wait for me a moment. With that, she turned and walked in that direction. When she came out again, Susanna noticed an additional person outside, dressed in a black trench coat, leaning against the wall as if waiting for someone. She didn't think much of it, merely glancing casually before preparing to leave directly. Yet, just as she made a move, the person suddenly stirred. He turned around, revealing a face she knew all too well. Yes, Rudolph, it is you. Rudolph looked at Susanna, his eyes still carrying emotions she couldn't decipher. He didn't approach but firmly blocked her path, preventing her from leaving directly. After a long silence, he spoke again. Just now I saw someone hurrying over who looked very familiar. So I came to check you. How have you been these years? Susanna didn't quite understand why he had stopped her here, but hearing his question, she hesitated for a moment before nodding. It's pretty good. On this point, Susanna was indeed not lying. Back then, she went alone to Country A, unfamiliar with both the place and the people, and with not much money to her name. In the beginning, it could truly be described as tough, but fortunately, she met Alvis. He was essentially her landlord, and later became her confidant and boyfriend. It was quite a coincidence that just when she was most worried about work and housing, Alvis appeared out of nowhere. He moved abroad to Country A with his father years earlier, after several years of hard work. He even managed to open his own clinic. Susanna had only intended to stay temporarily, repeatedly assuring him she would move out as soon as she found a job. But a few days later, they unexpectedly discovered they were from the same hometown while reminiscing about their origins. In fact, he was even her senior, 3 years her elder. But later Alvis went abroad with his father, while Susanna chose to give up further studies to take care of Rudolf. Otherwise, they might have met much earlier back in their home country, yet fate works in mysterious ways. They missed their first chance to meet but crossed paths again in country, where he extended a helping hand during her toughest time, offering her a place to stay. Later, Susanna also became a psychologist at that clinic. Because of Alvis, she held considerable authority and freedom in the clinic. When she lacked confidence due to caring for Rudolf and becoming disconnected from society, it was he who gradually encouraged her to bravely take the first step. Later, they met, got to know each other, and fell in love. Rudolf watched Susanna, who wore a faint smile as if recalling something, and emotions surged within him, as though something was about to break free. After a long silence, he finally stepped forward and stood before her. Rudolf was tall, towering over Susanna by a full head. Standing before her now, his shadow completely enveloped her. He raised his hand as if to touch her, but in the end, could only timidly lower it again. Susanna, I'm sorry, this apology was 3 years late, but he couldn't help thinking. Just 3 years, still better than never seeing her again in this lifetime. The abrupt, out-of-nowhere apology made Susanna pause in surprise. What? She instinctively asked again, only to seem to remember something after speaking. Susanna also didn't know exactly which past incident he was apologizing for, so she fell silent. Across from her, Rudolf had already begun to explain. I didn't know my mother would force you to leave. I never intended for you to go. Before he could finish his words, Susanna shook her head first, interrupting him. Madam didn't force me to leave. She merely happened to suggest my departure at a time when I was already planning to go. As these words were spoken, Rudolf felt an even deeper pain in his heart. In the years since Susanna left, he had imagined many possibilities, especially after learning that her departure also involved Mrs. Sanford's manipulation. He couldn't help but hope that Susanna hadn't left voluntarily, but had been forced to. He had also wondered what their reunion might look like someday, whether she would be overjoyed, or still holding a grudge against him. But the one thing he never considered was that Susanna would leave voluntarily, appearing so indifferent even during their meeting, as if he were merely an inconsequential acquaintance from her past. His heart wrenched violently. He opened his mouth, wanting to say something, yet it felt as though his breath was trapped in his throat, choking the words before they could escape. She was so heartless that after all these years apart, she couldn't even bring herself to fabricate a lie to spare his feelings. Yet if he were to simply give up, Rudolf felt the voice inside him screaming with unwillingness, insisting this couldn't be right, that she, of all people, shouldn't be this cold. I've come to know everything that happened back then. Susanna, I'm sorry, I was too narrow-minded at the time. Always feeling that you'd seen too many of my humiliating moments, and I couldn't face you. I was too young, too immature, treating pride as everything, thinking that was what I truly wanted. As he spoke, the corners of his eyes actually reddened slightly. Before Susanna could respond, he had already started speaking again. And also, I only realized later how many times I had wronged you. I'm sorry, I was too arrogant, always believing what I saw was the truth. If it hadn't been for later, when he said he'd have someone send Tess home. But she ran off alone, left with no choice. He had someone pack her belongings, only to unexpectedly uncover her yet-to-be-disposed poison purchase records and the remaining poison during the packing. Only then did he realize that Susanna had truly never poisoned Tess. It was also because of this discovery that he later went back to check the auction house's surveillance footage, finally seeing just how many times he had wronged Susanna. It's just a pity that the truth came too late. He never got the chance to apologize to her in person. Now he finally has the opportunity, but it seems she no longer cares. Susanna truly doesn't care anymore. The truth arrived too late, and she had long passed the point of caring about it. What use is a flimsy apology now? He can't undo the pain he once caused. And after all these years, Susanna doesn't want to be forever trapped by momentary suffering. Mr. Rudolf, is there anything else? If not, I should go now. My boyfriend is waiting for me outside. The moment the words boyfriend were uttered, Rudolf felt as if a thunderbolt had struck him, leaving his ears ringing incessantly. You have a boyfriend? As if puzzled by his intense reaction, Susanna nodded affirmatively once more. She didn't see any need to hide this. Her boyfriend was certainly presentable enough. After a brief pause, as if suddenly remembering something, she turned her gaze back to Rudolph. "By the way, we came back this time specifically to prepare for our wedding, but afterward, we probably won't return. You're very welcome to attend if you'd like." Her words had barely faded when a voice calling her name grew nearer. She looked up and sure enough, there was Alvis. "Susanna, how could a trip to the restroom take so long? I've been waiting outside so long the flowers are wilting." Mid-sentence, Alvis finally noticed Rudolph nearby, his eyes flashing with surprise. "Susanna, who is this?" "He is Rudolph, the president of the Sanford family group, the one I told you about, who funded my education," Susanna said without pretending not to know him, introducing the two openly. After a pause, she turned to Rudolph and added, "This is Alvis, my boyfriend." A simple introduction, yet it stung Rudolph twice. He never imagined that one day he would hear himself mentioned by Susanna only as a member of the Sanford family who had once supported her. And that Alvis shattered his last glimmer of hope completely. Before Alvis appeared, he could still console himself with the thought that perhaps Susanna's mention of a boyfriend was just an excuse made up out of spite. But from the moment Alvis appeared, he could no longer deceive himself, whether it was Susanna's subconscious tendency to move closer to Alvis, or the way she introduced him with a tone of greater respect while positioning Alvis in a more intimate manner. It was clear that even if they weren't a couple, their relationship was far from ordinary. "Mr. Rudolph, I've long heard of your reputation." Upon hearing Rudolph's name, Alvis narrowed his eyes slightly, a faint smile curling at the corners of his lips, though the warmth didn't reach his eyes. Before, he had only heard Susanna mention that she was born in a poor small town, where her parents favored sons over daughters and were even prepared to marry her off before she could finish middle school. Fortunately, she encountered the Sanford family at that time. They rescued her from her plight and even supported her all the way through university. Back then, he never imagined that the Sanford family who had sponsored Susanna was the very same Sanford family of the Sanford group. Nor did he connect the dots with that impoverished student who had foolishly and selflessly cared for the paralyzed heir of the Sanford group for years after an accident, only to be discarded and never seen again. He observed the shock and pain in Rudolph's eyes, and in an instant, he guessed exactly what Rudolph was thinking. After a long pause, seeing that Rudolph still hadn't reacted, he suddenly smiled and reached out his hand toward Rudolph. "Speaking of which, I should thank you for your generosity in letting go." This expression of gratitude was sincere, after all. If it weren't for Rudolph and the Sanford family failing to appreciate her worth, given how Susanna, who had studied diligently for over a decade to escape her troubled family, was willing to give up her easily attainable career without hesitation to care for Rudolph. Had Rudolph merely uttered a casual "I'll marry you" back then, perhaps things wouldn't have escalated to this point. The atmosphere between the two instantly grew tense. Susanna glanced left and right, then casually bid farewell before leading Alvis away. Only after they had walked some distance did Susanna cast a peculiar glance at Alvis. "You're acting strangely today." He feigned ignorance and asked with a laugh, "Strange? What's strange? You must be seeing things." The suitcase wheels rattled loudly as they rolled on the ground. Susanna thought for a moment and immediately realized where this sense of oddness came from, finding it somewhat amusing. "Why are you jealous of him?" Seeing her genuinely indifferent expression, Alvis grew even more displeased. "After how he and his family treated you, do you really not resent them at all? Susanna really isn't to blame, after all, no matter how you look at it. Without the Sanford family, there wouldn't be the Susanna of today." Perhaps as early as middle school, she would have truly been dragged back by her parents, forced to marry an older man she had no feelings for, or even met, simply because the other side offered a bride price they couldn't refuse. It was the Sanford family that saved her life. What she did back then was merely repaying their kindness. She did indeed have feelings for Rudolph. When Mrs. Sanford mentioned wanting her as a daughter-in-law, she wasn't without joy, and later, when she heard Rudolph's words about only seeing her as a sister, she genuinely suffered. But all of that had long been Rudolph buried in the past when he drew a clear line with her. "I only regarded them as benefactors." The two walked and talked, unaware that another figure had been following closely behind, hearing every word of their conversation clearly. Then, upon hearing this sentence, they froze completely in place. Just a benefactor. Rudolph suddenly remembered 3 years ago, when his friends threw a banquet to celebrate his recovery. At the banquet, they spoke of Susanna's years of care for him. Now that Rudolph has fully recovered, Susanna has finally seen the light at the end of the tunnel after enduring so much hardship. "Rudolph, when do you plan to marry her?" Hearing these words, his expression suddenly turned cold. "Don't talk nonsense. I only see her as a younger sister." Thinking back now, it wasn't long after he said those words that Susanna pushed the door open and walked in. Presumably, she had heard those words too, at that time. He only felt that the years of paralysis had made him appear too wretched and pitiful. He believed he should have been a dazzling prodigy, someone everyone looked up to, someone who shouldn't have any blemishes. So he tried his best to avoid the period of his paralysis and deliberately distanced himself from Susanna, who was inseparable from that time. Arrogantly, he thought that as long as he remembered the debt of gratitude, gave her enough money, and treated her with sufficient respect, Susanna should accept it with gratitude. At that time, he casually spoke those words, never considering how deeply they might wound her when they reached her ears, until this moment. She heard another sentence so strikingly similar, "I only regarded them as benefactors. How is this not a case of tit for tat?" He lowered his head with a bitter smile, pulling a square velvet gift box from his coat pocket. With a soft click, the contents of the box were fully revealed. It was a diamond ring, with a 5-carat pink diamond set in the center, flanked by smaller diamonds arranged to form 2 letters, RS. He carefully took out the diamond ring. Gently rubbing his fingertip over the tiny raised patterns, Rudolph and Susanna, that was the engagement ring he had specially commissioned after realizing his own feelings. He didn't know when he would see Susanna again, so he carried it with him at all times. Hoping that one day he could personally slip it onto her ring finger, he finally waited for their reunion. But this ring never even got the chance to be presented. Immersive translate. Susanna and Alvis's wedding invitation was delivered to the Sanford Family Corporation 3 days later. When it arrived, Sawyer and the others happened to be present as well. When the assistant went upstairs with the invitation and pushed the door open, they only saw Sawyer and a few others. After a brief moment of surprise, they handed over the invitation, asking them to pass it along. Looking at the red invitation, the group exchanged glances before finally giving in to curiosity and opening it for a peek, while silently reassuring themselves, "It's fine, it's just an invitation after all, not some confidential document." But when they opened it and saw the name inside, everyone present couldn't help but gasp in shock. Susanna, is it the Susanna they were thinking of? Just then, a voice suddenly rang out, "What are you all gathered here for?" Rudolph frowned the moment he saw several people huddled around the desk whispering to each other. The sudden voice from behind startled them, and they instinctively hid something behind their backs, forcing awkward smiles. "Nothing, nothing." Before the words could fully leave his mouth, Sawyer felt the object slip from his grasp. When he turned to look, sure enough, the invitation in his hand had vanished. A glance revealed Rudolph holding the extra red item. None other than the invitation they'd been hiding. Before they could stop him, Rudolph had already opened the invitation and saw the 2 names on it, Susanna, Alvis. A glance at the wedding date on the invitation revealed it was October 21st. He pursed his lips and remained silent, but everyone present involuntarily shivered, feeling the temperature around them drop noticeably, clearly indicating his foul mood. We have other matters to attend to, so we'll take our leave first." Seeing him like this, the others didn't dare stay longer and quickly made excuses to leave one after another. In the end, only Sawyer remained alone. The next moment, he saw Rudolph holding another small box in his hand. This wasn't Sawyer's first time seeing this ring box. Over the past 3 years, he had occasionally witnessed Rudolph taking it out to caress, as if reminiscing about someone, and who that person was went without saying. When did Susanna return? He looked at the invitation. Feeling something was off, after a long silence, Rudolph let out a bitter laugh before replying in a muffled voice, 3 days ago. I saw her at the airport." Upon hearing this, Sawyer widened his eyes in surprise. Meeting just 3 days ago and receiving an invitation 3 days later, the intention to distance themselves was unmistakably clear. After a pause, he finally asked, "What exactly did you say to her?" "How could?" Before he could finish, Rudolph shook his head first. "She said she came back this time specifically to get married." At these words, Sawyer also fell silent. He hesitated several times, wanting to speak but holding back, until in the end it all dissolved into a sigh. What more could he say? After all, it was Rudolph who had broken Susanna's heart in the first place. Yet, when brought up again, there was still a tinge of regret. Back then, everyone had thought Susanna would end up with Rudolph. And it was clear to all that Susanna had feelings for Rudolph. If she didn't like him, how could she have tolerated Rudolph when his temper was at its worst? But at this very moment, Rudolph seemed to suddenly make up his mind about something. "I won't give up like this. The person Susanna likes was originally him. She should have been his all along." To everyone's surprise, after he said this, Sawyer, who had always thought they should be together, paused in shock. After a long silence, He looked at him with complicated emotions and asked, "Why must you go this far? Back then I didn't know how to cherish, and now Susanna is about to marry someone else. What's the point of struggling over whether to let go or not? There's no should or shouldn't about it. I love her, and I absolutely can't just stand by and watch her marry someone else." Sawyer was also startled by her words and tried to persuade her further, "But she's already fallen for someone else. What else can you do if you're unwilling?" The latter half of the sentence was ultimately swallowed back by him, yet Rudolph seemed to have discerned his unspoken words. Still, he remained unfazed and even smiled. "So what, if I could make her fall for me once? I can make her fall for me a second time." Seeing that persuasion was futile, Sawyer shook his head and sighed helplessly, ultimately saying nothing more. Forget it, suit yourself. But he knew that Rudolph probably wouldn't succeed. Perhaps he hadn't yet realized that Susanna was the kind of person who, once she set her mind to something, would never turn back, just like when she decided to care for the paralyzed Rudolph. No matter how much he hit, scolded, or drove her away, she never once thought of giving up, and just like later, when he recovered, the moment she realized she was being excluded, she quietly began planning her departure, then vanished without a trace from all their lives. Perhaps there are always some people who only realize, after hitting a wall, that what or who they've lost is something they can never get back, no matter how much they regret it. After everyone had left, Rudolph took the ring out of the box. He gazed at the letter representing Susanna on the ring, gently stroking it while murmuring softly, "Susanna, I will never give up like this." Meanwhile, Susanna remained completely unaware of all this. Returning to their home country to hold the wedding was actually Alvis's dad's suggestion. Alvis's dad, though now settled abroad, knew that the elders of the Allison family were still in their home country, thinking that Alvis's grandpa and Alvis's grandma hadn't seen their grandson in a long time, and considering that their friends were also back home, they ultimately decided to hold the wedding in their home country. Planning a wedding is a troublesome and time-consuming affair. With the wedding date set in a hurry, they had numerous matters to attend to during this period. Running around every day left her utterly exhausted, with no mood to think about anything else, completely pushing Rudolph out of her mind. But she never expected that while she had forgotten Rudolph, Rudolph hadn't forgotten her, and even showed up right in front of her. When she was cornered at the bathroom door once again, Susanna simply felt weary at heart. This time, she had merely stepped out alone without Alvis, and he seized the opportunity. It seemed that for the rest of her time in City K, unless absolutely necessary, she couldn't venture out alone anymore. "Is something the matter?" After a moment of silence, it was finally Susanna who spoke first. Rudolph didn't answer her question, merely looking at her as if gazing upon a long-lost treasure. His gaze was so nakedly intense that she couldn't help but frown. Just as she was about to speak, she saw him raise his hand. In the next instant, darkness enveloped her vision as she completely lost consciousness. When she awoke again, Susanna found herself in an all-too-familiar room. She groggily sat up, instinctively reaching for her phone only to find it missing. Before she could ponder further, the sound of knocking timely interrupted. She remained silent, not responding, but the person outside didn't seem to wait for an answer and simply opened the door. The moment Rudolph appeared, she felt a sense of inevitability in her heart. "Susanna, would you like something to eat?" Seeing her awake, he didn't mention her earlier lack of response. Instead, he smiled gently and placed the food he was carrying on the nearby table. "I thought you'd probably be awake by now. You haven't eaten in so long. You must be hungry, so I brought some food over." Susanna glanced at Rudolph a few more times, never expecting that he would actually do such things, feeling genuinely hungry. She didn't keep arguing with him and simply took the bowl and chopsticks to start eating. As if surprised by her compliance, Rudolph was momentarily taken aback when she really began eating without a word, then smiled again. "It seems Susanna is adapting quickly. It was worth the effort of gathering the things you used before and decorating the room just as it was when you were here." Hearing this, Susanna froze for a moment. She looked around at the furnishings and decorations, only to realize with astonishment that this was the very room she had stayed in 3 years ago. A strange emotion surged in her chest. After a moment of silence, she turned her gaze to Rudolph and asked, Why do all this? Why bring her here? And why go through the trouble of restoring the room to its original state?" He remained seated at that neither too near nor too far distance, the smile on his lips never fading. Hearing her question, he instinctively pursed his lips. After a long pause, he took out the ring box from his pocket, the one he always carried with him. "Because I love you, Susanna. I can't just watch you walk away from me." He slid the ring toward her, his voice soft and faint. yet carrying an affection she couldn't ignore. Susanna, don't marry him, okay? During my lowest moments, you were the only one who stood by me without hesitation, encouraging me to move forward. I once thought I could live without caring for you, but when you left, I realized I can't live without you. So, Susanna, don't leave me, don't abandon me. By the end of his words, his face had already shown a trace of unease and anxiety. Susanna had never imagined she would one day see such an expression on Rudolph's face. But as she listened to his words, she faintly furrowed her brows. Love? What kind of belated love is this? In Susanna's understanding, loving someone is something that cannot be hidden, even if one doesn't realize their feelings at the time. Their subconscious will instinctively protect and care for that person, just as when she loved Rudolph. She heard that Rudolph was devastated after being paralyzed in a car accident, and without hesitation, she went to his side. Even though he was moody and volatile at that time, often lashing out at her, she never once thought of retreating. Similarly, later on, Alvis's approach to her was that even when she repeatedly refused and retreated, he remained steadfast and persistent, ultimately winning her over with genuine affection. But Susanna never experienced that kind of feeling when she was with Rudolph, even in the later stages when he was nearly recovered. His attitude toward her gradually softened from its initial harshness, but it was only slightly more amicable. What about Mrs. Tess? Susanna lowered her eyes to conceal her emotions, her voice calm. He wasn't saddened by her attitude. Instead, hearing these words made the delight in his eyes grow even more evident. Susanna, rest assured, I can promise you, I don't like Tess. Ever since I found out that he was the one who fell down the stairs and poisoned himself to frame you, I made sure she paid the price she deserved. From now on, City K will no longer have any trace of the Song family. I also know that in the past, I failed you, but back then, I was just too fixated on how she had abandoned me during my hardest times. After all, she was my first love, for over 20 years. I've enjoyed boundless success, whether in academics or business partnerships. I've rarely made the wrong choice, yet, she is the exception. I always wanted to prove to her that she was wrong about what happened back then, or to erase the stain of her abandoning me, to prove I hadn't chosen the wrong person. But Susanna, it wasn't until you left that I realized I was wrong. I could overlook those things. I could have just you. Susanna, I know I hurt your heart before, but now I understand my mistake. Give me another chance, please. His eyes were filled with sorrow and plea, hoping she might at least nod, if not outright refuse. But Susanna looked at him and slowly shook her head. He heard her say, Rudolph, let me tell you a story. Once upon a time, there was a little boy who always had a bad temper and liked to take his anger out on his friends and family. His father then handed him a wooden board and some nails, telling him that whenever he got angry, he should hammer a nail into the board. The little boy took this to heart. Every time he got angry, he would hammer a nail into the board. After a long time had passed, the boy's father took him to the board and asked him to pull out all the nails. All the nails were removed, but the board was left with permanent marks where the nails had been. Rudolph, between you and me, it's just like the boy in that wooden board. Some things, once done, cannot be undone. They're not something you can simply forget. Those marks will remain forever, impossible to erase. After finishing the story, the two fell into silence once again. Rudolph knew all this, of course. He just couldn't bear to let go so easily. Even if there was the slightest glimmer of hope, he wished Susanna could leave everything in the past behind and start anew with him. Can I have my phone back? After a long silence, it was Susanna who broke the quiet first, but her words instantly threw him into a panic. He hurriedly stood up and began clearing the leftover food from the table, changing the subject. Since you're done eating, I'll take my leave now. If you find the room too stifling, you can go downstairs or take a walk in the yard. No one will stop you. As soon as he finished speaking, he had also cleared the dishes and hurriedly left with them, his retreating figure even carrying a hint of fleeing in panic. Susanna did not stay in the room the whole time. As Rudolph had said, after eating, she strolled around the courtyard, also testing the limits of her permitted movement. After testing, she could roughly guess why mentioning the phone made Rudolph flee in panic, because he didn't dare to return it. He had deliberately taken the phone away, fearing that she would immediately contact someone to rescue her upon waking up. So he gave her the greatest freedom within the villa, yet severed all means by which she could contact the outside world. She sat by the greenhouse, gazing at the sky dyed orange by the setting sun in the distance, occasionally casting a glance toward the direction of the study on the second floor. Ever since she came out, Rudolph had stayed in the study without coming out again. Susanna truly couldn't understand. What was the point of this? He couldn't possibly keep her trapped forever. She would leave eventually, so why bother with these futile efforts? Rudolph never cared about the passage of time, but now he feared that one day she would leave him again, just like the last time she disappeared. So now, he didn't want to miss a single moment he could spend with her. Susanna counted to the third sunset when Rudolph returned once more, this time bringing a large batch of Phalaenopsis orchids with him, 2 days earlier. Rudolph had asked if there was anything she liked that he could bring her on his next visit, and this was what she had requested. Truthfully, City K wasn't the ideal climate for growing Phalaenopsis orchids, but with enough care and the right conditions, they could still thrive. The long period of idleness gave her plenty of time to tend to these flowers. She personally transplanted each of those Phalaenopsis orchids into the greenhouse, meticulously caring for them. Rudolph only relaxed when he saw how much she truly enjoyed it. Thank you. After finishing all the tasks, she turned to Rudolph, who had been waiting at the greenhouse door, and smiled as she expressed her gratitude. He waved his hand, the smile at the corners of his lips almost impossible to suppress. As long as you like it. After a pause, he added, whatever you like, I'll do my best to get it for you. These words, if heard by Susanna when she still had feelings for Rudolph, would likely have moved her deeply. After all, nothing is more touching than hearing someone you care about promise to do their utmost to obtain what you desire. But the Rudolph of today is not the Rudolph of the past, and the Susanna now is no longer the same Susanna from before. All her love for him was shattered on the day he said he only saw her as a sister, fought fiercely for Tess, yet didn't even glance at her as she was pushed down the stairs, during her stay at the villa. Every day Susanna could see the villa becoming more like it was when they lived together before. She accepted it all with a smile, and since he didn't say anything, she pretended to know nothing. Every day, she went about her own business. When he came home from work, he would bring his laptop and share the same space with her. During meals, he sat beside her, eagerly serving her dishes. One day, Rudolph even called Sawyer to keep her company. Fearing she might be bored since he would be returning late, Sawyer only realized after arriving at the villa and meeting the people that Rudolph had directly imprisoned Susanna in the villa. Holy shit, is he crazy? Almost instinctively, the sarcastic remark slipped out. Compared to his astonishment, the imprisoned Susanna remained extremely calm as she watered the recently transplanted Phalaenopsis orchid in front of her. Hearing his words, she slightly raised an eyebrow. I thought you all knew about this all along. Rudolph rarely kept things from Sawyer and their group of brothers, whether it was his paralysis from the car accident, which drastically changed his temperament, or his desire to break off the relationship with her after recovering and reunite with Tess, or even when he wanted to be with her again. These matters Rudolph hardly concealed from Sawyer and the others. She had assumed they all knew about her imprisonment, but judging by his reaction now, it seemed he had just found out. Sawyer shook his head, also surprised by her composure, and instinctively asked, aren't you about to get married? How can you be so calm? Panicking won't help. She pursed her lips, her face full of indifference, her voice tinged with self-mockery. He's already taken away all the tools to contact the outside world. Apart from tending to flowers to pass the time, there's nothing else I can do. Hearing her say this, Sawyer also felt a pang of discomfort in his heart. He opened his mouth to say something, but nothing came out. Sawyer couldn't go to Rudolph to suggest that he release Susanna, nor could he promise Susanna that she would definitely be sent away. Most of the brothers who followed Rudolph had family businesses closely tied to the Sanford family's conglomerate. They couldn't afford the consequences of Rudolph's anger, nor could they disregard their families for Susanna's sake. Fortunately, Susanna never expected them to help her, and she believed that Alvis wouldn't make her wait too long. 2 more days passed, and it was Susanna's birthday. Rudolph had specifically cleared all his work schedule, but it wasn't until he was preparing the cake that he realized how little he truly knew about her. He didn't even know what flavor of cake she actually liked. Left with no choice, he ended up buying every available variety. Counting back, this was likely the first time he had formally celebrated Susanna's birthday with her, before his paralysis. As someone born with a silver spoon, he wouldn't have noticed the birthday of a scholarship student his family supported. Later, when she came into his life, his personality had drastically changed due to the paralysis. Consumed by shame over his vulnerable state being seen, he took out his frustrations on her at every turn. Later on, Rudolph gradually improved under her care and encouragement, and he finally learned to retract his thorns, treating those around him with peace. It's just a pity that among those around him at that time, Susanna was not included. He still resented the fact that she had seen his most vulnerable side so clearly and completely, maintaining only a superficial peace out of gratitude. By the time he realized his true feelings, Susanna had already packed her bags and quietly left his side. But he comforted himself, thinking it didn't matter, even if he didn't know enough about her yet. They still had the future. He would gradually incorporate all her habits and interests into his own life, bit by bit. As soon as he got home, Rudolph proudly laid out all the gifts in front of her. "Susanna, see if there's anything you like. If not, I'll have someone buy more." Before Rudolph returned, Susanna had already prepared herself mentally in two ways. Whether he was pretending to love her and had forgotten her birthday, or whether he truly loved her and would go all out to celebrate, she had mentally prepared herself for either scenario. But when Susanna saw the cakes and gifts that nearly filled the entire living room, she couldn't help but freeze for a moment. "Why did you buy so much?" Rudolph paused, his expression faltering. He opened his mouth as if struggling to speak, stammered a few words, and then began to evade the question. Seeing him like this, Susanna quickly understood. During their limited time together, Rudolph's gaze had lingered on her paralyzed legs, on Tess, who had once abandoned him, leaving very little attention for her, so little that now, when he wants to please her, he probably still doesn't know her preferences very well. She lowered her head and chuckled softly, suddenly feeling a sense of relief that the person she chose wasn't Rudolph. Seeing her smile, Rudolph mistook it for satisfaction with his preparations and smiled in return. Susanna didn't say much, randomly picking one from the pile of gifts. "This one will do." Her choice was an amethyst bracelet, inconspicuous among the array of presents yet still exorbitantly valuable. The faintly glowing lavender crystal rested in her palm, accentuating the fairness of her skin. She stared blankly at the bracelet, her peripheral gaze falling upon the certificate inside the box. The bracelet was worth nearly 10 million, yet among this collection of gifts, it still ranked among the more modest offerings. For no apparent reason, she suddenly recalled the time when she had just arrived in Country A, with pitifully little money left in her hands, barely enough to cover a few meals, let alone a place to stay. Back then, she was so strapped for cash that she had to take odd jobs to earn money while pondering her future path. If she had owned such a bracelet back then, even selling it at a discount would have given her enough money to live comfortably for a while. Perhaps she wouldn't have been forced to rest in random places due to her financial struggles and nearly gotten entangled in a murder case. Fortunately, her luck held out, or perhaps it was because hitting rock bottom led to a rebound, allowing her to meet the most important person in her life during those toughest times. Alvis was someone she met during her part-time job. Perhaps because it was rare to encounter a fellow countryman, coupled with the joy of meeting an old acquaintance in a foreign land, he couldn't resist chatting a bit more while placing his order. Out of a sense of customer service, she exchanged a few words with him. Little did she know then that those few words would connect her to her future. "Susanna, happy birthday." Rudolph's voice pulled her back from her thoughts. She forced a slight smile, lowering her eyes to conceal all emotions, and softly said, "Thank you." Just as her mind was wandering, a slice of cake was placed before her. Looking up, she saw Rudolph's smiling face. "Susanna, there's no need for such words between us. This time was really too rushed. Next year, I promise to throw you a more fitting and grand birthday party." "All right." Susanna remained silent. She took a bite of the cake. The expensive cream was smooth and sweet without being cloying, yet it tasted somewhat bland in her mouth. She subconsciously clenched the bracelet in her hand, the amethyst beads clicking together with a crisp sound. Actually, she didn't like any of these gifts. What she truly wanted was to leave this place and return to Alvis's side. If only Alvis were here. She missed him a little, wondering if he had found out where she was by now, or if he was still anxiously searching for her. Once she got home, she would stay obediently at home and tie him to her side wherever she went. This was probably Susanna's first birthday without any sense of anticipation since she met Alvis. After eating the cake and returning to her room, she looked at the star decoration on the dressing table and couldn't help feeling a bit aggrieved in her heart. She had clearly made an agreement with him about what signal to use if they couldn't find each other. Several days had passed, so why hadn't he come to get her yet? But just as she finished this thought, Susanna sighed again. Forget it. The Allison family's focus in recent years had ultimately been overseas. In terms of influence, they certainly couldn't compare to the Sanford family's conglomerate, which had always been the industry leader domestically. She would wait a little longer, but if he dragged it past the wedding date, she would definitely settle the score with him properly when she got back. Susanna had thought Rudolph's limit was imprisoning her here, trying to wear down her resistance. But she never expected his intentions went far beyond that. When only 1 week remained until the wedding, she was suddenly blindfolded and taken by Rudolph to a certain place, When the cloth covering her eyes was removed, she realized the surroundings had been meticulously arranged. Countless white roses formed a heart shape, while further away, the words "Marry Me" were spelled out with Phalaenopsis orchids. Before her, Rudolph stood dressed in a sleek, well-tailored black suit. With every strand of hair meticulously styled, showcasing his utmost attention to detail. Standing around were Sawyer and a few others, their smiles stiff and their eyes betraying a hint of guilt whenever they met her gaze. Like Susanna, Rudolph was also surrounded. He knelt on one knee, looking up at her with unconcealed nervousness. His heart pounding so violently it felt as if it might burst from his chest at any moment. "Susanna, I love you. Could you give me a chance to take care of you and spend the rest of my life with you?" Time seemed to freeze at this moment. Rudolph wished this instant could stretch longer, yearning for her answer to come just a little faster. Two thoughts kept tangling in his mind until the atmosphere was abruptly shattered by a sudden clamor. He frowned with displeasure and was about to stand up to inquire when he saw Alvis bursting in with a group of police officers. Breaking through the servants' blockade. "Freeze, police, Susanna." After being imprisoned for an entire week, Susanna finally heard the voice she had been waiting for. Almost the moment the words fell, she turned her head to look, instinctively about to turn and walk toward Alvis, when her wrist was suddenly grabbed. "Susanna, can you, please don't go." From the moment he saw Alvis, Rudolph knew that the time he had stolen was finally coming to an end, but when he saw Susanna rise without hesitation, his heart couldn't help but ache with pain. A slightly hoarse voice sounded by her ear. She turned to look at the hand tightly gripping her wrist, its knuckles distinct, adorned with a ring. When they first arrived at the villa, he gave her a pair of rings. During her silence, both sides were tense, fearing she wouldn't choose their own. Aside from Rudolph, there was also Alvis. He was afraid too, afraid she would ultimately choose the man who had occupied her entire youthful infatuation. But fortunately, she only paused for a moment before reaching out to pry his fingers open one by one. "No, Rudolph, I've already started my new life, and you should move on with yours too." She paused briefly before continuing. "Rudolph, people must always look forward. Don't remain trapped in the past, or you'll only miss out on more things." Susanna still left, departing without hesitation, just as everyone had expected. Her departure even made Sawyer and the others breathe a sigh of relief when they saw it. They could all guess that if Susanna had truly stayed, perhaps every day afterward would be like today, forced to accept Rudolph's affection without ever finding real happiness. Perhaps this is what they call destined to meet but not to be together. They both loved each other, but unfortunately, they were never in sync. At the time when she loved him the most, his heart and eyes were filled only with his own pride. He would rather pour all his attention into someone who had once abandoned him than spare a little for the person by his side who truly deserved his care. But by the time Susanna left, he regretted it and wanted to make amends. However, no one in this world will wait for someone forever. A week later, the wedding took place as scheduled. Susanna did not invite her own parents. So all the scenes at the wedding where her father should have been present were now replaced by Alvis's dad. She held onto Alvis's dad's arm, her voluminous skirt trailing on the ground, looking like a true princess from afar. Even though it was Allison's family welcoming a bride, Alvis's dad walked down the aisle with the genuine sorrow of giving away a daughter. Wiping his tears, he warned Alvis, "You brat, if you ever dare to mistreat Susanna, I won't let you off easy." Alvis's eyes overflowed with happiness as he took Susanna from Alvis's dad's hands. It seemed like a promise to Alvis's dad and a vow to Susanna. "I will definitely protect Susanna and never let Susanna suffer any harm. I will love Susanna for a lifetime." The overly straightforward sweet talk made her ears turn crimson. Pressing her lips into a smile, her eyes brimmed with affection as she said, "I believe you." The officiant continued with the ceremony, his smile utterly unconcealed. "Mr. Alvis, do you take Ms. Susanna to be your wife, to have and to hold, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and cherish, till death do you part?" "I do." "Ms. Susanna, do you take Mr. Alvis to be your husband, to have and to hold, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and cherish, till death do you part?" Susanna turned her head, quietly squeezing the hand that held hers, her lips curling into a bright smile. "I do," amidst the rising applause. Susanna and Alvis exchanged rings, and the MC then announced, "Now, let's welcome the bride and groom to share a kiss." This was actually Susanna's first time performing such an intimate act in front of so many people. She watched as Alvis lifted her veil and drew closer, their scorching breaths intertwined, ambiguous and lingering. "Fool, close your eyes." With a light chuckle, she blushed deeply and closed her eyes. The next moment, A soft and tender sensation spread from her lips. Below the stage, Rudolph watched the scene, feeling his heart twist in pain, as if 10,000 needles were stabbing relentlessly at his chest, yet, he had no right to even cry out in agony, because all of this was his own doing. His own arrogance had caused him to lose the person he should have cherished the most. Amidst the cheers, he was the only one who left in solitude. The banquet hall was filled with guests, while outside, Rudolph stood alone facing the police who had come with an arrest warrant. City K Police Department. Mr. Rudolph, it has been confirmed that you are suspected of unlawful confinement. We are now executing a lawful detention. Please cooperate. Rudolph remained silent for a moment, then turned to glance once more toward the banquet hall. They certainly picked a good day. He nodded without resistance and obediently followed them into the police car. Susanna saw Rudolph again 3 months later. After finishing their honeymoon, they stayed at Allison's family home to accompany Alvis's grandpa and Alvis's grandma for a long time, until the clinic in Country A could no longer be delayed, and only then did they embark on their return journey. Just as she arrived at the airport, Susanna saw someone unexpected. He was casually sitting on the steps outside the airport terminal, with a few stray kittens circling around him, meowing for the food in his hand. While absent-mindedly petting the kittens, he looked up and locked eyes with Susanna. Holding one of the kittens in his hand, he slowly walked up to her and asked, "This time when you leave, you're not coming back?" She nodded in response, while he lowered his head with a bitter smile. "Then goodbye, and have a safe journey." Rudolph watched their figures gradually disappear into the crowd. They wouldn't return in the future, and he couldn't go abroad either, this time. Saying goodbye truly meant never meeting again. The end.